Can? Okay. So our second editor would be Professor Joyce Wang from DDTR. She's an associate editor of drug delivery and translation research. She's a professor at the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Boston University, USA. And for our third editor at the Q&A session, we have Professor Elva Ropenthal from DDTR. She's the special issues editor at DDTR, and she's an associate professor in the Department of Ophthalmology and the director of Buchanan Ocular Therapeutic Unit at the University of Auckland, New Zealand. And 2 days ago, I saw the new site scores results. So JCR have a new site score 14.4, and drug delivery and translation research have a new site score of 4.9. I think the site scores are now doubled, so congratulations for this improvement and achievement, and thank you for listening. Stop screens. Okay. Can you start playing the pre-recorded presentations?
It's great to see so many people especially in virtual conferences like that. So I'll try to summarize in the next minutes, in the next 10 minutes, and try to explain how to get published in the Journal of Control Release, this perspective of publisher. But luckily we have here Tuan to explain a little bit more from the perspective of the editor. But before we start that, let's talk a little bit why we want to publish in a journal, right? Why do you want to publish in a scientific journal at all? Not only JCR, but all the different journals. So as an author, you might have your own reasons for doing that, right? You might want to get your graduation, you might want to promote yourself from your PhD, to get your next position, research, to go for your next research grant, to find your next network cooperation. Those are all valid reasons, and they are your reasons. And yet, the editors, the reviewers, in the scientific community, they don't take into considerations your reasons into publishing a new article in a journal. They look into is what's really this paper helping the other researchers in the field. Does this paper uncover any information, any new technique, any new concept? This is really what's driving them, and it's really what they are constantly thinking when they are looking to your paper. So then I will talk a little bit about the purpose of the Journal of Control Release. So the reason why do we exist. In the field of drug delivery, many innovations have been achieved and helping patients deal with diseases more effectively. And JCR is really proud to be serving the community by providing a forum for scientists to present and discuss their findings. So those findings can advance the field and ultimately lead to the development of better drugs and useful formulations. It's very important for you to understand the goal, why do we exist? Because this has been constantly supported by editors, and this is the core of why some papers are accepted or not accepted. It's really focusing on the clinical translation and useful formulations. So then let's go and talk a little bit about what JCR wants, right? So I think it was the first question that Mohamed asked me, and he said, please go into the specifics. So I will try to answer some of the questions here. What type of articles JCR publishes? So we publish articles that see the big picture. What's the ultimate goal of this research? Publication or the improvement of the drug delivery for patients? And I'm hoping that you have chosen the latter. In the end of the day, JCR is interested in publishing articles that will make real clinical progress. A common misinterpretation by many authors is that they send papers to JCR and they think, oh, if it doesn't have in vivo data, they will not accept. It's really not the case. The reason why many authors receive this comment from our editors regarding the lack of in vivo data in their papers is very simple. It's because certain hypotheses and certain concepts, they need in vivo data. They can only be proven with in vivo data. For instance, many papers, they claim targeted drug delivery to tumors based on in vivo data only, because of the presence of targeted ligands on the nanoparticle surface. It doesn't take into consideration how even the nanoparticle get into the tumor. And you are probably aware of all the biological challenges in living beings. So such papers are not sent for reviewers. The second one is, having said about the in vivo, there's a lot of important advancements that can be seen in the in vitro studies. So a lot of studies can advance the drug delivery science without in vivo data, especially if there is strong records of relevance of such studies in the in vivo applications. Like a lot of the drugs and the new drug candidates are poorly water soluble. So any innovative approach that can meaningfully increase the solubility of poorly soluble drugs in the body, in vitro data may suffice. Of course, assuming that you are using excipients generally acknowledged as safe. Another example is studies dealing with mechanistic understanding of principles issues in carrier transports, like membrane permeation, intracellular trafficking, and so on. For such investigations, in vivo data may also suffice. Whether JCR editors require in vivo data or not, it really depends on the nature of your own study and the relevance and the impact of your study in the in vivo environment, how it's translated in the in vivo situation. The value of so this means that target drug using cell cultures is a no-go for us. Don't send it unless if one says otherwise, but I don't think so. Many authors also present data indicating a new formulation resulted in improvements in drug delivery over enough to guarantee a publication in JCR. So many authors, they actually feel that, you know, if they have done an experiment and they didn't come with great results, that the negative side of this story is very hard to sell and to pitch. So they submit articles, sometimes dealing only with the positive results that they have it in their own studies, even though those results are marginal or doesn't even exist. So, but what's important to say is that understanding why a certain formulation failed in animal studies or clinical studies is very important, and they really can lead to great insights. Presenting a new insight into a widely accepted theory that has not yet been translated into results in the clinical studies can really be important. So we really welcome those data that do not conform with the widely accepted theories, proven that they have been carefully designed, by carefully designed experiments, so that you have thought about it, the experiments, and designed in a proper manner. And finally, I will talk a little bit about the importance of diversity. The drug delivery research covers all the disciplines, from science to engineering, that affect pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, and the additional body responses such as toxicology and immunity. The progress in our field really depends about testing various ideas and learning from them. I think many trials and errors help us to identify what are the really best formulations, and gradually we are moving the body of knowledge forward. It is an evolutionary process, and this is essential in producing drug delivery systems that can cure patients from suffering from great diseases, bad diseases like cancer, life-threatening diseases, and so on. Or also alleviating symptoms of those who have chronic diseases. This process actually can be accelerating when you're combining forces from different disciplines, like clinicians, combining the heads of clinicians, engineers, pharmacists. And that's why we really welcome research from other disciplines that can improve the understanding of those interactions between drug delivery systems and the body, and the challenging needs of the clinicians. So then I will talk a little bit about scientific writing. And kudos to Keenan for both slides. So scientific writing is still writing. It's all about telling a story, telling your work story. And you're telling the story for people that have great understanding in the field, like the peers here today, but also people who don't, like your grandparents, your kids, your partners who don't work in the field. And the ability to be able to explain what you do and the relevance of what you do is very important. It's a skill that you must develop. And believe me, it's very hard. This is the only way that you can be able to connect all the different disciplines, clinicians, engineers, policymakers, to actually achieve a common goal. And yet, even though it's very hard, with persistence and experience, it gets much better. So the editor's pledge here with JCR, as long as the manuscripts describes a study that provides a new insight into the drug delivery, we will make every effort to publish it. And I think this is very important to say, because this was coined by Keenan Park, the former editor-in-chief of the journal, but it has been supported and embodied by all the different editors of JCR. And they serve, the JCR editors, they give their best to serve this work, to serve and to work with authors to reach this common goal. They serve the journal with ultimate integrity and fairness. And I hope you see them as ally, as someone who was in your shoes a while ago. So work with them, listen to what they have to say, and take those criticisms not as a I could have done it better, but as a constructive feedback of how you can improve for your future. Then Mohamed asked me to talk a little bit about the JCR editorial, the changes in the JCR editorial team. Last year, Keenan Park announced that he wished to step down as the editor-in-chief position in 2020. He realized that for the JCR to remain the forefront of the community, the journal should evolve as the community is evolving. So then he helped me forge a new editorial structure together with Christine Allen as the editor-in-chief and Stefan de Mested and Yu Kyung-oh as the deputy editors-in-chief. Together with all the other editors, they are bringing the JCR to the next level of research. It's worthwhile to mention that in the past 12 months, we also appointed several other new editors, like Professor Shun Sun, Qing Juanzhong, Yun Yeo, and more recently, we also brought Professor Randy Mirsney, Honggang Kui, and Joe Oking. What you will see is that a lot of them, they do have different backgrounds from engineering, immunology, and so on. So this is what we are trying to embody, you know, to bring together and to make JCR a more inclusive representation of the community we serve, and the researchers and the areas and the regions. So for my last slides, I would like to say a little bit about our research center. There is much more that goes into really the details. So I didn't cover here that much on the structure of the article because I think it's what Michael will talk a little bit about the letters and the specifics. But in the Research Academy, you will be able to see all the different steps of research preparation, writing a research, the publication process, how to promote your research, research integrity, and so on. So feel free to use it, those resource center is very, very useful and it's very comprehensive. And of course, follow us in Twitter and WeChat accounts. And this is for JCR, but for ADDR, we also have a Twitter account. Thank you.
Mohammed, you're muted. I'm not muted. So.
Sorry. Thank you, Fernando, for your wonderful presentation, and we will head now to Michael.
Okay. So let me just. All right. So what I'm sort of discussing would be some do's and don'ts when submitting a manuscript. I'm not a scientific editor. I sort of handle the back end of things, making sure that the journal is run smoothly and that production is running well. So what I can talk about, what I feel qualified in talking about would be some common mistakes that I have heard from the scientific editors over the course of my career. Let me just move it out of the way. So Mohammed introduced me earlier. So I'm a journal development editor with Springer Nature. I've been with them for 2 years. Currently, I work on DDTR with Dr. Alonso. And in addition to that journal, I do handle a portfolio of pharmacology journals. Prior to being with Springer Nature, I was a production manager at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which is sort of the equivalent to the Society for Aerospace Engineers. And prior to that, I was a peer review manager at PNAS. So the first stage would basically be to making sure that the journal you're selecting is correct and is the right journal. So if you fail to select the right journal in the first place, you're probably going to have your article be rejected right away. So always make sure you check the aims and scope. Make sure that like what you're talking about is something that they have signaled that they're interested in publishing. You can always find the aim and scope clearly labeled from the homepage. Another method would also just be, to make sure that do a PubMed search and see to make sure that like that journal is showing up as listed on that on the subject that your paper is about. You can also take a look at what you're citing, because that would be a good clue as to which journals you should be looking at. So if your work fits, then you should submit. If not, you should keep on looking, because I assume you don't want to have your manuscript rejected. So another thing that I've always heard is, and heard complaints about from editors, is to make sure that you include a cover letter and that it's good. So this will be like really your first chance to get the editor interested in your work. This might be the first, maybe the second thing that they'll look at. They'll look probably at the abstract first, and then they'll jump to the cover letter. So this cover letter can tip the scales towards getting your paper past the desk reject stage. So in the cover letter, briefly state the significant findings of your paper. Be clear about that and be succinct. You should also say why you think this article is appropriate for the journal, and say how it relates to recent works that have been published on that subject in the journal. Don't neglect to include it at all. Some places probably will require you to actually include a cover letter. Some places might make it optional. And this is one thing that's sort of make sure that when you're in the cover letter that you are using the journal's proper name. We do realize that you will shop around sometimes for journals, but I have seen it on multiple occasions that the authors just used the cover letter from the previous journal and forgot to change the journal's name, and that's pretty much a good clue to the editor that they might just reject it right then and there just because they didn't take it seriously enough to change their cover letter. But sometimes they do let it go just because, everyone makes mistakes. A third thing to do is to always make sure you suggest reviewers when they're asked. Now, everyone wants to avoid reviewer number 2, but that's going to happen. But please do suggest them. And I would take this opportunity to suggest people that you would actually want to put this work in front of. People that, like, if you were at a conference and presenting your work as a poster, like, if this person dropped by, you'd be really excited that this person stopped by, because in addition to having your research show up to the editor, this is also showing up to the reviewers as well. And so you want to make sure that, like, you're getting it to people that you would actually want to see this. And so remember that a well thought out list will help the editor find reviewers and will save everyone time in the long run. However, you do have to make sure that we can actually use those reviewers. Springer Nature, along with most publishers, we have to follow certain ethical guidelines for which reviewers we would secure for a paper. So we cannot use reviewers that are at the same institution as any of the authors or were recently at the same institution as one of those authors. The time frame can vary from 3 to 5 years. It's sort of varies from publisher to publisher. Also, they should not have been recent collaborators with any of the authors on the paper. Again, it's like a 3 to 5 year window. And then the other thing to bear in mind is that we cannot have 2 reviewers be at the same institution as each other. So make sure that you have a wide breadth of who you're suggesting to review the paper. And finally, this doesn't have anything to do with your current submission, but please do be willing to serve as a reviewer. This will have not necessarily any impact on your current manuscript, but it does make sure that everyone's work gets through as fast as possible to everybody else. And thank you if you have been serving as reviewers for DDTR and any other scientific journal. One last thing to bear in mind is to always check submission requirements. They're going to vary from journal to journal. You can always find these detailed information on the information for authors, which will be probably somewhere like in the how to submit. It'll be clearly labeled to make sure what manuscript files we're asking for. We'll probably be very loose on the first go around, so we won't necessarily require you provide a source files because we're going to get more stringent on our revision, because then if you're being revised, you're one step closer to possibly being accepted. And then we want your source files so we can start production right away. So just make sure that in the final end that the file types are supported by the journal. Make sure that figure files are at the correct resolution so that we don't have to go back and forth with you. If there's any ethical or author contribution statements that are required, make sure that they're there. We cannot move forward with that. If there's any human research involved, we need the proper certification from that ethical governing body that you had to apply to do that experiment. We should also make sure that all authors meet some of the requirements for authorship. Those should be clearly listed on the publisher's page. You should also make sure that no one's left. It would be a shame to later on have to add an author to the journal if it gets, to the article if it gets published later. Also, make sure to pay attention for items that are unique to the journal. For instance, with DDTR, we're asking for graphical abstracts, and make sure to look up what a graphical abstract should really be, and try and make sure that that really fits what we're looking for. That's basically it that I would say, and would sort of be some of the tips and tricks that I would have to sort of make sure that you're putting your best foot forward when you submit your paper.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, for your nice input and great presentation. Can you stop the screen sharing?
Ken, I think we can stop. Sorry, I think we're having some technical difficulties here. I don't know why Mohammed was kicked off, but he's back.
He's back now.
Yeah.
Sorry, my internet broke.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's okay. Welcome back.
Okay. Thank you. So we finished the presentation. So
Yep.
Now we will head to the Q&A session. I encourage the audience to ask their questions, but we will start by our questions. So our first question would be about the title of a paper. What is an ideal title? Do you look for a concise title, or you are looking for a title with more details, maybe mentioning the materials used, the type of cell lines, whether the study is in vivo, in vitro, and the drug name? All of these details, should we include them at the title or not? So let's start with Professor Wong, and
Okay, so I think in a title, you just want to be as descriptive as you can and keep it, I would keep it as concise as you can. So just think about when you yourself are doing a literature search and you actually look to see if the title is something that you would be interested in reading. So you don't necessarily have to put all the materials in, whether it's in vitro and vivo, just make sure that the title captures the essence of what the paper is.
Professor O?
Yes, it's very similar to that the Joyce just mentioned. It needs to be very much concise, and especially for the people whose language is not mother tongue is not English, the grammatically correct title is very important. Often we see some title, which is not grammatically correct, that really bothers many editors as well as reviewers. So pay attention on the grammatically correctness of the talk. And concise is very important. Yeah, it doesn't have to be specific.
Thank you, Elva.
I totally agree with the previous two comments. I personally would say concise is better. Obviously, you want to have enough information in there, as Joyce said, that you know what the article is about. So for example, for me, if I'm doing a literature search and I'm searching for articles on the eye, ocular or eye somehow needs to be in the title for it to be picked up. So, you know, whether you're working on a certain disease or a certain body part, or you say oral delivery or topical delivery or something, I think that kind of information should be in there. But giving too much specifics on all the materials and the cell lines or the specific animal model might make it a little bit too long. So if anything is over 2 lines, I mean, sometimes you go over 1 line when you're writing your title, but anything longer than 2 lines is far too long.
Thank you for your answer. So we have a question from the audience. It's about renowned labs and the editor bias to their paper. So what's your thought about that? Joyce, do you want to start?
Yeah, what does the questioner mean by bias? Do you want to be more specific?
I think they meant maybe.
You mean giving them favorable? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
To give them preference?
Yes.
Well, I
prefer.
Yeah, no, I think everyone would like to say that it's a fair process, right? That in fact it's not really. So the editor will then select reviewers, and as was given by the second talk that you just watched, the recorded talk, you can actually suggest reviewers. We don't necessarily use those reviewers because, as you can imagine, those reviewers have to agree to review, and sometimes, you know, people are busy or for whatever reason. So it's really the decision is the editor actually selects reviewers, and then based on their reviews, the editor makes a decision. So I would say it's not like a simple choice that I say, oh, this is from a famous lab, I'm just going to accept the paper. That we have rules. You just can't do that. So I would say that the bias, I think, at least for the journals we're talking about here, I think you don't have to worry about that.
Great. Yu-Kyung.
Yes, the famous lab, well, the reviewers and editors don't really put a lot of emphasis, but maybe if I'm a handling editor, I'd like to pay more attention on the pedigree of that lab, because the big lab usually have their previous postdoc will get a job in some academia as an assistant professor, and I will pay more attention that I will not send the paper to their previous postdoc or their previous graduate students, because big lab has a lot of network. So I'd like to be more fair, handling of the paper, more special care, sort of, Mm-hmm. All right.
Elva.
Yeah, personally, I mean, it's a really good question, I have to say, and there's obviously a lot of discussion about unconscious bias that can happen when you look at names, you know, reviewing things. That's why some journals prefer to have, you know, the double-blind review where you don't actually see who the authors are. So even the don't, you know who's written that paper. I personally, as an editor, it doesn't matter to me, you know, who's written the article. It goes out to the reviewers, and I look at the reviewers' comments. I base the decision on that rather than looking at the name and saying, oh, this is a famous lab, I'm just going to accept the paper. So yes, then I think there's still some work that might need to be done in the background there to make sure that unconscious bias doesn't happen, but it's certainly not something I would say that happens at the editor level.
But I think what just to add what Yu Kyung said, I think it's really important point she made about a big lab has a huge network. So you do have to be careful of that, because some labs in particular, they're just everywhere, right? It's almost impossible to find a reviewer, right, that's not connected. So, yeah.
Thank you for your answers. So I will ask our pre-prepared questions until the audience asks new questions. So I want to ask about the letter to the editor, or the cover letter. So what are you looking to get from that letter, Joyce?
Yeah, I think, again, similar to the title, it should really be concise. And I'm thinking about my own letters that I write too when I'm submitting a manuscript. It has to be descriptive, and it has to very, in a short, like a short paragraph, basically say what is the essence of the paper and why it's novel, what's innovative about it, and why it's appropriate for that journal, which you heard again, I think in both recorded talks, they talked about journal scope. And so I think I would just, those are the things that you focus on. And usually in the letter, although it depends on the journal, you can then at that point say, these are the reviewers I'm suggesting for these reasons. Sometimes that's in the letter or it's in a different part. But again, just keeping the message simple and saying really the kind of bullet points almost of why the paper is important.
Thank you, Yu Kyung.
Can you take turns? Can I ask Ilva to say first?
Sure.
Yeah, you
Sure,
can.
why not?
Ilva is always the last person, so I'd like to change. All right. Ilva, you do first.
Yeah. You could switch up the order. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So I agree with what Joyce said. I think the cover letter is a mix of like commenting on the scope of the journal and how your paper fits the scope, and what the innovative part or what's new in your paper that hasn't already been published. I think one thing we do not like as editors is a copy and paste of your abstract, because we get your abstract anyway. So make sure that you take the most important parts of your abstract, in terms of what is innovative and how it fits the scope of the journal to tie that together. So we literally just need to read those 3-4 lines or 3-4 bullet points to say, hey, yes, this paper is a great fit. If you just go copy and paste of the abstract, that doesn't help us at all, because we get the abstract anyway.
Thank you. So Yu Kyung.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I'm agreeing with almost all the other two editors. So the point is that it doesn't have to be lengthy. I mean, the editors are pretty busy. I'm handling a lot of papers in one single night, so it should be only 2 sentences would be just enough. Don't pay too much attention to writing up, the cover letter. So only 1 or 2 sentences, and the significance, that will be enough, I think. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So another question from the audience is how to volunteer to review, especially for young scientists who don't have lots of papers maybe. So what's your thought about it? So could we start with you, Yu Kyung?
Okay, thank you. Okay, nice speech. Okay, let's take turns. All right. So sometimes I get the emails from the volunteering, the young scientists. They just to describe that their specialty is like ocular or siRNA delivery. So they just send me an email. Then I have my own personal database that this person wanna serve as a reviewer, and I sometimes share that kind of my volunteer review list with other editors. So just feel free to send an email to the editors of your region. Yeah, it's very simple. Yeah.
Great. So I want to follow up on that. How many papers should the reviewer have, maybe, and what kind of CV, minimum CV you're looking for?
To whom? Maybe Joyce or Ilva?
Yeah, I can take this. I think we need to clarify, right? So is this coming from a PhD student who's still a trainee, or maybe a postdoc? I think it really depends on your experience, right? So I know other journals, like I believe it's Elsevier, that actually have programs where you can apply to be a reviewer in training, and they actually mentor you through the process. I think it's different, like if you are, let's say, a postdoctoral researcher that you've published many kind of papers, and it really kind of depends on your expertise. When I'm looking at people, I don't think they directly write to me, but I think I actually do a literature search sometimes, and then check to see that they're like either like an assistant professor, or maybe I know in Europe they have lectures, so they're different. So I think there is some kind of criteria that you have to have. You can't just be a trainee. I think you can. I think there's certain laboratories where maybe getting that experience, right? Certainly when you submit a paper, then you will get reviews back, right? So I guess it really depends on the scope. I know this is a young, the CRS, young scientist, so I don't know really the audience. Are we talking, are these trainees still, or who's the question coming from? I think it's going to depend on what level you are in your training.
Yeah,
Elva?
I had an experience recently where I didn't have time to review a paper, and I suggested one of my PhD students who is working exactly in that area and who would have been great because they know the literature a lot better than me, but the editor's answer was no, they have to have their PhD. So I was a bit disappointed about that, so don't be let down if that happens. In terms of how you can get to that stage that you become a good reviewer. So what I do with the students in my lab is, in that case, if a paper like that comes across and it really fits in with my PhD students' work, then I'll say to them, you review this, and then we come together and we discuss it. And I still say to them, you can put it on your CV, although officially in the system they haven't done it, but they've reviewed it, they've reviewed it with me. And by doing that, let's say 5 to 10 times during their PhD, they're then proficient enough to do it themselves once they have their title, although to me a title doesn't say that a person is good or isn't good. As Joyce said before, there are a few programs, and I think I recently was a mentor for someone. I think you can do it on Publons as well, because I was asked to be a mentor on Publons for someone to say whether the review of the paper they did was acceptable, what they could do better. So I would encourage you to do that. But if you're a PhD student, talk to your supervisor and say, hey, next time you come across a paper that you have to review that fits my area of research, can I review it with you? I want to learn how to do this.
Thank you for your answers. We have a question from the audience, from Puya. He's talking about review papers. What are the important points that editors looking for in the review papers in the field of drug delivery? So who wants to start?
It's gonna start.
Okay.
Ilva, what about you?
Sorry, which one was the question? I'm just looking at the chat and I think I missed it.
Yes, the question is from Puya. He's saying about review papers. What are the important points that editors looking for in the review papers.
With review
The
papers,
drug delivery
obviously,
sciences.
yeah, obviously you don't want to have a review paper that you've read yesterday in another journal, right? So there needs to be some edge to it, that it's just not exactly a repetition of, you know, an article that you've had just a month ago in another journal. So again, when you're writing your cover letter, you know, obviously, you know, in my field, there's only so many ways you can write about ocular drug delivery, but there might be a focus on a specific point later on that relates, you know, to your own research, rather than just talking about nanoparticles and ocular drug delivery, which, you know, there's an article about every month. So I think still think about how you can do your review, which you might have to do for your thesis, you know, general review, but how you put that specific edge onto it so it is different to, you know, the other 10 articles that have been published in the same area in the last year.
Yukio.
All right. The review paper, I also serve as an editorial board member of ADDR, so I had a chance to review some review papers. But when I just to check that kind of review paper submission, what I usually underline is the challenges and perspectives. Somebody just to copy and paste, it's kind of just a summary of other people's work. But the review paper, you have to really just looking at what are really challenging things. What if you are the person, how you can just solve that kind of challenges. Your own view, your own words should be included. That's really important thing when you write down the review paper. So I always say challenges and perspective. That's really unique part and essence. Okay.
Joyce.
Yes, I would agree with what Yu Kyung said, is that it just can't be a compilation of the what's in the field. You really have to then have a message of as she mentioned, the challenges and what are the kind of opportunities, right? What are the obstacles that are there that can move the field forward, right? That's what you're really looking for. And then there are quite a few review articles, right? I mean, the advanced drug delivery reviews, they're all review papers, right? So there's a lot of reviews out there. So you just have to make sure that you're not repeating something. And I think it's okay for you to approach an editor in advance and say, I'm thinking, like I've actually done this myself, approaching somebody at a journal, like the editor, and saying, we're thinking about writing this review article. What do you think? And then in this particular case, they said, yeah, well, we published something just only a couple of years ago, so we probably wouldn't. So that saves you a lot of time to actually check in advance sometimes too.
And I think, Yukong, isn't that a requirement for JCR that you contact the review editor first?
Mm-hmm.
I think it is for JCR, correct?
Yeah. In JCR, there is a specific the review editor, so you have to contact with the review editor. Yeah.
And it's a better idea than wasting your time, right? The last thing you want to do is write something, spend all that time, and then nobody takes it, right? That's the worst.
Great, thank you for your answers. And we have another question. It's about if we don't have in vivo data, can we include quality-based design or quality by design in our paper to make it publishable in maybe higher journals?
Joyce, maybe you start first.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it really depends on the scope and the impact. What reviewers are really looking for is impact. And I think you want to demonstrate that your findings are actually going to lead to something. And then, I mean, sometimes it's very common for a reviewer to say, this is interesting, but we want you to do more experiments, or we want you to do this. So it really, I think that's the element of the unknown, of the 3-4 reviewers, whoever, essentially what they're going to say. That's the whole purpose of the peer review. So again, I think it's a combination of what the scope of the journal is, and then, but then really what your paper is adding to the field.
Thank you, Elva.
Yeah, I agree with Joyce there. I think it depends on the scope of the journal, and you will find that there are some pharmaceutics journal out there that actually, you know, like QBD data. But again, you need to say in your, you know, in your cover letter, what's new, you know, have you used a new technique or a new polymer or something? So it's not, you know, PLGA nanoparticles that have been published for, I don't know, 200 times or something, you know? So just make sure that you explain what's different in the approach you've used, that you're not just simply repeating something that's already been published.
Hugh Kyung.
I think I agree with all of them. So we can just go to another question, I think. Yeah. Shall we move to another question?
Next question. We have a next question about figures. What is an acceptable quality? There are size limits in the submission process, but sometimes the images are blurry for that limit. So what is the balance? Sometimes we also see blurry images in some published papers. So yeah, Yu Kyung, you want to start?
The figures, some general comment is that the figures need to be legible, and from figure to figure, you need consistency. And the third part, what I see is some statistical treatment, especially for the quantitative data. Okay, so if the font size is too small, like font size 6 or 7, I mean, many reviewers are in their 40s or in their 50s, so their eyesights are not so good. So you can just think about the reviewers' old eyesight. So at least 8-point size, legible and easy to read. And if you use like Arial font, please be consistent from figure 1 to figure 7. Use Arial, the same one. Don't just mix sometimes figure 1 Arial, figure 2 Times New Roman. It really makes the kind of low quality. So be consistent, and always put the asterisk about significance, p-value, that kind of 3-point, I would say. Maybe other people have some more things to say. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you should not be putting blurry images in your paper, because remember what the purpose of the figures is they need to support whatever conclusions you're making in your paper, what statements you're making. And so if a reviewer says, I can't judge from this data in the figure that's being presented, then they're going to send it back and say, this is a comment, it needs major revisions, or maybe it's reject or whatever, but certainly major revisions, it'll say, you need to replace that figure so it can we can assess the actual statement, that the conclusions you're drawing. And because a lot of times I think it's helpful for you to understand that when you review the paper, you really want to understand, is it really innovative, and if it's adding to the literature, but then also does the data support the conclusions that are actually stated in the paper. So if you have a blurry figure, that's not going to help.
So I'm just going to add some practical points here. Yeah, I get really annoyed with blurry pictures and things that move all over the place, and, you know, things that are not in line. You know, I'm German, I like nicely, you know, in one line, and not space like this here and space like this here. It really puts me off. So first comment, don't put sub-figures together in your Word document that you're submitting at your manuscript, because, you know, when that gets converted to PDF, sometimes sub-figures move around. So make sure that your figure is one figure. So combine them, you know, in another software into one TIFF file that you then insert into the manuscript, rather than having separate sub-figures. Stay with the same font size for sure. Make sure everything is nicely aligned. You have nice spacing. Ideally, if you're working with, you know, like, I don't know, immunoimages or something, work in image J, where you make like a template, and then your, you know, your ABC is all in the same corner, and, you know, your line spacing is nice. if you're working with various graphs in Excel and you know, for example, copy them over into PowerPoint, I personally find it sometimes quite annoying to work with Photoshop because you have the different layers and then you're not in the right layer when you're moving things around. So I'm more of a fan of PowerPoint, but keep in mind that the output of PowerPoint, unless you change it, is only 90 dpi, and that's not sufficient. But if you Google how to change DPI output of PowerPoint, there's a quick explanation on how you can change it to 300, and 300 is most of the time acceptable for most images that you have. Another suggestion I have is, once you've uploaded your images and your manuscript file and you get the compiled PDF, look back into the PDF. If you can't see the figure properly in the PDF, the reviewer can't, and your paper, will not get accepted. So make sure that they're there. I know that sometimes the PDF conversion can mess up your figures, and I've re-uploaded figures many times, and depending on how the system does it. But if the PDF does have a link to the original figure, that's fine still. But ideally, you want your figure to look nicely in the converted PDF that the reviewer gets.
Thank you for your answers. We have another question from Puya. From editor's point of view, is advanced 3D in vitro models, for example, co-cultured spheroids, organoids, are an acceptable alternative for in vivo experiments to answer delivery scientific hypotheses in a paper? So, Yu Kyung, you want?
Well, the organized models, this is it's kind of a tool, right? So, but the papers, when I review paper, I really look for what kind of insights, what significance they have. So the organoid or in vivo model is not really the point. I think how much insight they can give from the organoid model research, what's their hypothesis, whether their data really supports the conclusion. I think the tool does not really make that kind of strong impact on the decision. So it's kind of conclusion and the solid design of the work, I would say.
Thank you, Elva, Joyce.
I mean, I agree with you. I don't have much more to add with that. I agree that it shouldn't be so tool focused, right? There are certain journals that you can do methods that may be more appropriate, but I agree with these journals with the drug delivery. I think you really want to show that there's some kind of insight, and especially if you're talking about an organoid or something, you would have to demonstrate some kind of validation, right? I think just to show that it is relevant. Right, it's still, organoid is still a very early kind of field, and I guess again thinking of it in the scope of the journal is as well, because we certainly get some articles where they just don't fit, and then they'll get sent out, they'll get sent back to you because they don't fit.
Yeah, I totally agree as well. I would probably add that. If you're doing comparative studies between different formulations or something, those kind of models might be appropriate in the initial phase, but just make sure that you state the limitations of the model, that you're not saying in your conclusion, oh, this is going to, work the same in vivo, because it's not. So just make sure that you're wording your conclusions in a way that, fit the model that you've used, and that you acknowledge some of the shortcomings that those models might have.
Thank you. So we don't have other questions from the audience. Maybe for last question, I will ask it myself. I want to ask about graphical abstracts. So can graphical abstracts boost your chances in getting your paper accepted? What kind of graphical abstracts are you looking for? And Yeah, so Joyce, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, I'll take it. For GDPR, actually, I don't even look at the graphical abstract. I think it might even, if I'm not mistaken, it might be added afterwards. But no, that it plays no role at all. And again, it's the content of the paper in terms of its hypothesis, its conclusions, and supporting data.
Yu-Kyung?
Well, in case of JCR, I usually see graphical abstract at the first page. So the graphical abstract, I would say, is really important to get the attention of the editors or the reviewers. So I think for JCR, graphical abstract is like business card of that manuscript. When you meet somebody, you just give your business card. So graphical abstract is very concise business card of your paper. So it's concise but impressive and very, it's kind of some artwork. It's really helpful to get your attention. And don't avoid too many words. Some people say some paragraphs in the graphic abstract. You should avoid that part, okay? That's my message.
Okay, Elva?
Yes, I would say I'm now speaking more from a reviewer point of view. I'm personally a visual person, so I like graphical abstracts because it gives me an overview of the paper, especially if I'm not an expert in the area. You know, if there's some sort of schematic or how things work together, that makes it a lot easier for me to understand the story of the paper. I agree that definitely don't put too much text in. It's all about, you know, don't show all the results figures. Pick one of the most prominent results figures, or, you know, like a diagram or something. But don't try to cram too much and keep it very simple. Obviously, there's dimensions on how you have to prepare the graphical abstract. And again, if you're putting some words in, make sure they're readable, that the font size is not too small.
Okay, thank you very much for attending this session. We are very honored to have you here. And please follow us on social media. The links are in the chat description. Also, you can give us feedback on this session. Also, the link is provided. It's a Google form. We will happy to receive your feedbacks. I want to thank the team, Ken, Crystal, and Flavia for the previous session, and the editors, of course. We were delighted to have you. So for finishing up, we will replay the CureVac video. So if you want to stay, please, can you start the video?
The story of CureVac begins at a frontier, and with the idea that something lies beyond this frontier that has the potential to transform not just medicine, but the entire world. Our discovery? The building block of life, RNA, is able to deliver the body's own blueprint for health. This was long considered impossible. Just as messenger RNA is needed to convey the health-giving information to the body, there has to be a messenger, a courier, to herald the new and make the breakthrough possible. At CureVac, we see ourselves as just that, as messengers of the new. Because RNA technology will revolutionize the world. For it takes effect where everything begins, within every single one of us. New therapies will help people and defeat illnesses such as cancer, and new vaccines will provide protection from infectious diseases faster and more cost-efficiently than ever before. This will bring health and hope to people all around the globe. The revolution has begun. It wasn't us who started it. It was RNA.